Have you ever met someone who made you feel deeply connected, but also left you feeling unsure at the same time? Someone who looked at you like you mattered, but then slowly disappeared as if you didn't. Stay with this, because what you're about to understand can completely change how you see this kind of connection. At first, it feels almost perfect, natural, effortless. There's a pull you can't explain. Conversations flow easily, emotions feel intense, and for the first time in a while, you feel truly seen. It feels real, like something meaningful is finally starting. But then, something changes. They start to pull away, not in a clear or direct way, but slowly, subtly. Messages take longer, energy shifts, their warmth fades into distance, and suddenly you're left confused, trying to figure out what happened and what you did wrong. You replay everything in your mind, every message, every moment, every detail. Exhales. You search for an answer that never really comes. And the hardest part is this: nothing officially ended. There was no clear goodbye, no explanation, just distance and silence. That's where the confusion begins to grow, because when something ends clearly, your mind can process it, it can accept it, and move on. But when there's no closure, your mind stays stuck. It keeps trying to understand, trying to fix something that no longer responds. You start questioning yourself. Did they ever care? Was it all in my head? Why does it feel so strong if it wasn't real for them? Slowly, your emotional state starts depending on their behavior. When they get close, you feel valued. When they pull away, you feel rejected. This back and forth isn't random. It affects the brain deeply. When attention is given and then suddenly taken away, it creates a powerful psychological loop. Your mind starts craving the connection more, not because the person is stable, but because they are unpredictable. You start chasing the feeling, not the person. But there's another layer to this that most people don't see. Some individuals struggle with emotional closeness, not because they feel nothing, but because closeness feels overwhelming to them. When connection becomes real, something inside them triggers fear. Fear of losing control, fear of dependence, fear of vulnerability. So they pull away, not because you are not enough, but because the emotional intensity feels too much for them to handle. This creates a painful mismatch. For you, love means getting closer. For them, emotional pressure can mean stepping back. So while you move forward, they retreat. And this creates a cycle where you chase and they distance. You try harder, they withdraw more. You give more, they pull back further. And without noticing, you start losing your own emotional balance. You begin focusing more on their behavior than your own peace. You wait for messages, analyze tone, and hold on to small moments like they define everything. Deep down, you feel something is off, but another part of you still holds on because the connection once felt so real. And that's what keeps you stuck. You're not actually chasing them. You're chasing the version of them you met in the beginning, the version that made you feel seen and important. And your mind keeps hoping that feeling will return. But what keeps repeating is a cycle: closeness, distance, confusion, hope, and then distance again. Even when you try to move on, something pulls you back. A message, a reaction, a small sign. And suddenly, everything resets. This happens because your mind never fully registers the situation as finished. Without closure, it stays open internally, and the brain naturally keeps searching for completion. Add inconsistency to that. Warm moments followed by silence, attention followed by absence, and it creates a strong emotional loop. Your brain starts associating this person with reward, but in an unpredictable way. That unpredictability makes the attachment stronger, not weaker. Even when you step away, your mind stays connected, waiting for the next emotional moment. At the same time, when you pull back, they often feel that shift too, not always consciously, but emotionally. Your distance changes the dynamic. It creates uncertainty for them, and that uncertainty sometimes brings them back, just enough to restart the connection again. And then the cycle repeats. You feel hope again. You think maybe this time it will be different. But then the same pattern returns: distance, silence, confusion. Over time, this makes you question yourself. But the truth is, this isn't about you being too emotional or too much. It's about inconsistency creating emotional instability. Without consistency, there is no safety. And without safety, the mind never relaxes. It stays alert, always thinking, always waiting, always analyzing. That's why even when nothing is happening, you still feel drained. And slowly, you start normalizing uncertainty. You start accepting less than what you need, convincing yourself that intensity means something meaningful. But intensity without stability is not love. It's imbalance. Still, even with all this awareness, the connection doesn't disappear easily. It shows up in thoughts, memories, and emotions that return without warning, because it feels unfinished. But something important also starts happening within you. You begin to see the pattern. You start noticing the cycle instead of just feeling it. And that awareness changes everything, because once you see it clearly, you can't fully unsee it anymore. A moment comes when something inside you quietly shifts. You stop asking, why are they like this? And instead you ask, why am I allowing this to continue? And that single question changes the entire direction of your thoughts. Because now the focus is no longer on decoding them. It turns inward. At first, this feels uncomfortable. You start noticing things you once ignored, how much effort you were putting in, how often you were adjusting your emotions just to keep things stable, how many times you stayed quiet just to avoid losing them. And slowly, a truth starts to rise that you can't unsee anymore. You weren't just in a connection, you were carrying it. You were holding something that was never balanced from the start. And that realization doesn't feel empowering in the beginning. It feels heavy, because now you can't pretend it was equal anymore. You can't keep telling yourself that if I just try harder, it will work. Clarity hurts before it heals. This is the point where many people break emotionally, not because of the other person, but because of what they finally see about themselves. You feel exhausted, not from loving, but from overgiving, not from caring, but from carrying it alone. And in that exhaustion, something begins to change. You stop reacting instantly. You stop over-explaining. You stop chasing reassurance, not out of anger, but out of awareness, because now you see the pattern clearly. Every time you gave more, it didn't create balance. It only deepened the imbalance. So slowly, you start pulling your energy back. It's not easy, because part of you is still attached to the outcome, still hoping things will shift. But another part of you starts choosing differently. You begin choosing peace over intensity, clarity over confusion, yourself over uncertainty. And that is where everything starts to feel unfamiliar, because now you are no longer operating from habit. You are moving from self-respect. You stop trying to secure their presence. You start protecting your own. This shift creates space naturally, not forced distance, but emotional separation that happens on its own. And in that space, something begins to change in the dynamic. The energy they were used to receiving from you is no longer fully available. The easy access they once had starts to disappear, and that creates a reaction. Not always immediate, not always obvious, but real. Because when someone realizes they are no longer receiving what they once took for granted, it creates awareness. They notice your absence differently. They feel the change in ways they didn't before. And that feeling is uncomfortable for them, because now the pattern is no longer predictable. The control is no longer one-sided. You are no longer chasing. You are no longer waiting. You are no longer proving anything. And that version of you is unfamiliar to them. This is where reflection becomes possible on their side. But it is also where most people lose themselves again, because the moment they see even a small sign of return, they open the door too quickly. They fall back into old patterns, and the cycle repeats. But if you stay grounded in what you've learned, something deeper begins to develop within you. You become stable. You are no longer dependent on their behavior to feel okay. You stop being emotionally pulled in every direction. You stop confusing intensity with love. You stop accepting inconsistency as something meaningful. And that is real growth. Quiet, internal, steady. At this point, even if they return, even if they reach out, even if they try again, you are not the same person anymore. You don't respond from the same emotional place. You see things more clearly. You feel less urgency. You notice what you ignored before. That clarity gives you something powerful: choice. Not control over them, but control over yourself. And from here, the entire connection changes. It is no longer something that runs your emotional world. It becomes something you observe, something you evaluate, something you no longer lose yourself inside. Now reality becomes simple. Either the connection grows into something stable, or it reveals that it was never aligned in the first place. There is no more confusion between the two, because when you are no longer operating from need, everything becomes clearer. If there is something real, it will show through consistency, not intensity, through actions, not temporary attention. And if there isn't, you no longer force it to mean more than it is. In both outcomes, something important happens. If they rise, you meet them from a stronger place than before, not as someone waiting, but as someone aware. And if they don't, you walk away without losing yourself. And that is where the real transformation sits, because what once felt like emotional confusion was actually a process of awakening. It was never only about them. It was about you learning what you can no longer accept. You stop chasing validation. You stop attaching meaning to inconsistency. You stop confusing emotional highs with emotional safety. And once that shift happens, it doesn't stay in one connection. It changes how you see everything. You no longer look for intensity. You look for alignment. You no longer settle for unpredictability. You look for consistency. You no longer abandon yourself for connection. You choose yourself first. And from that place, something very simple becomes clear. Real connection does not require confusion. It does not require chasing. It does not require losing yourself to keep it alive. It meets you where you already stand. In the end, what you go through in this kind of connection is not just about another person, it is about you learning to see clearly. What once felt like deep emotion mixed with confusion slowly reveals a pattern that pulls you out of yourself and makes you question your own worth. But as you start to step back, you begin to understand something important. Real connection doesn't require chasing, overthinking, or losing your peace. It requires balance, consistency, and self-respect. And once you reach that awareness, everything changes. You no longer stay where you are uncertain. You no longer depend on mixed signals to feel valued. You choose yourself first, because the real outcome was never just about whether they stayed or left. It was about you becoming someone who no longer confuses intensity with love and never abandons themselves for it.